Good morning. Right, going straight to the next slide, please. Okay, this is obvious for most of us, but I think in terms of fairness capture, compared to the strong historical focus we've had of getting our gene and protein names right, bioactive chemistry comes a bit more of a Cinderella. Yeah? So we all know small molecules that do things in vitro. This is the translational end of the biological sciences, and most of them were interested in modulations of macromolecules by specific molecular mechanisms of action. This underpins medicines development, drug discovery, systems pharmacology, chemical biology, you name it. All this stuff involves bioactive chemistry. And it's fundamental to structure activity relationships, including for where we got the structures in, in, in PDB. And there's massive value both at the big data level and the small data level to capture this in mineable databases. But we're left with a peculiar historical quirk that the vast majority of bioactive chemistry is still entombed or hamburgerized into PDFs over many decades. If we get it out, it can become a substrate for artificial intelligence, prediction testing. I'd add also fair is fair enough, but your aim is to also make the work as a consequence of fair also to be reproducible. So whether that's fair, I don't know. We'll see. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is what I think is a useful shorthand. Doesn't cover all the mechanistic quirks of indirect activity or where your assay is irreversible in activation. But in general, we all know how to do this in the domain. We read the document, we find out where the assay is described, we look at the results, we try to explicitly find the chemical structure and map it to the target as specified in the document. Notice that's actually a guide to pharmacology entry in the chemistry, and that there are several representations of explicit chemical structure. But this one, the SMILE string, is very popular. It's not completely standardized, but by and large, on a good day, it is machine extractable if you see that text string. Going into the protein, in this case, it happens to be, you probably didn't read the title, there's actually a broad spectrum inhibitor of the COVID-19 protease. So once again, the representation, there's quirks in this case, i.e. actually that protease doesn't have a Swiss prot ID because it's part of a polyprotein, but that's another quirk. Next slide, please. Okay, now the trouble is when this data is published, i.e. these millions of papers over the years, you've got these impediments. The first thing is, of course, as a relationship chain, the DAR-CRP is not rendered machine readable, at least in any publications I've seen so far. This case is not even open access. For the ACS JMed Chem, there's a paradox. Actually, due to encouragement by Michael Gilson some years ago, authors do submit SMILES and on a good day activities marked up as a supplementary data sheet, but nobody formally acknowledges that they do anything with these sheets. So it's really peculiar. As one of the extraction sources, which I'll mention later, the IU5BPS Guide to Pharmacology, GTOP2B, the UK Elixir node. In this case, it's FAIRified, this paper, because we now have a small welcome grant to focus on curating COVID-19 data for the viral targets in particular. So as a consequence of the curation, biocuration, see that chemical structure, we forward it into PubChem. Now, in terms of how it was working in the system, could be at least a couple of years before it gets into the Chemical queue. And just to be clear, unless you get your compound structure in PubChem along with the other 100 million, where it's similarity search, it can be similarity search to find it. It's not maximally findable and accessible unless it's there. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of the total capture, how much is out there? Well, your best estimate is from commercial activities over the last couple of decades or so. Even these were acknowledged, even their extraction is not complete, but they have reasonably good quality focus on what they decide to pull out. So you can get some. Now, nobody agrees in the way they count things. We live with this, but if you look at the GoStar, used to be from Accelera, used to be GPK Bio, and the Elsevier Reactions Medicinal Chemistry, they both have large curator armies extracting the ARCP from the literature and from patents. So roughly speaking, they've mapping activities to around between 7 and 8 million compounds. Okay, the other numbers are kind of a movable feast, and they count them differently. I think 10,000 RMC is clearly overcounting by homology, but there's about 10,000 targets, and they pulled out roughly just under 400,000, maybe nearly 400,000 papers, and patents have redundancy, but the lower count for, I take the Accelera accounts of around 80,000 patents. Next slide, please. Now, public. I haven't got time to unpack this slide, but I'll give you a reference at the end where we have. PubChem's so let's start. Chembl, we know about EBI, Elixir Core Resource. That's got the lion's share of structures. BindingDB, there's mirroring going on between Chembl and BindingDB, so you have to watch that for the circularity. But BindingDB have a new focus on patent extraction, public patent extraction of the DRCP, so I counted that separately. We're Guide to Pharmacology, smaller but perfectly formed in some senses of so their coverages. So you can see targets, activities, and patents. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my penultimate slide. Okay, so the public capture shortfall of bioactive chemistry is at least in the order of 5 million compounds. So public capture is around 2 million-ish. Okay. Targets probably fairly well covered in the public domain, particularly by Chembl, and these go forward to open targets and stuff like that. But there's certainly some patent-only novel targets that have been captured on the commercial side. Now, the good news is Guide to Pharmacology, Chembl, and BindingDB should continue their complementary capture roles. They have slightly different foci, and they all have unique, a proportion of unique content. But as we all know, this is dependent on the funding continuity of those resources. Now, the bad news is that even by now, unless I've missed it, no single journal has ever instigated a formal process to extract the DARCP as a relationship chain and pipe it directly into open databases. Now, in terms of FAIR, some of the things we've been hearing about today will definitely increase the uptake, even by journals, will increase the capture of the individual entities, the documents, assays, and results, uh, compounds to document and proteins. They will flow into these various repositories, but not the relationship chain, as Simon said. So, and we also know automated extraction of DRCP is a long way off, but a biocurator can discern these relationships in the paper within a matter of a few minutes. It may take them a few minutes longer for a patent. That's all last slide, please. So that's all I can cover today. I've had a paper out a month or so ago, which I'd encourage you to read. I think this one has to cover it. I'm fond of doing Venn diagrams where you can, which gives you overlap and complementarity between sources. So I've explained some of the background to these slides in this paper. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.